What happens when one of the most controversial figures in modern media steps onto a late-night set and refuses to play by the rules? In just 37 seconds, a simple question about public service turned into the most explosive exit in television history. Greg Gutfeld sat behind his desk that evening with his usual calm confidence. The studio audience was packed. The lights were bright. Everything seemed normal. But nothing about this interview would end up being normal at all. Meghan walked onto the stage wearing a designer outfit that probably cost more than most people make in a month. The audience clapped politely. She smiled and waved like she was greeting her loyal subjects. She sat down in the guest chair and crossed her legs with an air of superiority that filled the entire room. Greg started with a simple welcome. "Thanks for being here tonight. I know you've been pretty quiet lately, so I appreciate you coming on the show." She tilted her head slightly and gave him a look that could freeze water. "Well, I don't do just any show, Greg, but I thought your audience might benefit from hearing the truth for once." The audience went silent. You could feel the tension already building. Greg smiled, but you could see something shift in his eyes. He was not someone who got rattled easily, but he definitely noticed the condescending tone in her voice. "Fair enough," Greg said smoothly. "So, let's talk about your recent statements regarding public service. You've said in multiple interviews that you've dedicated your life to serving others, but a lot of people are wondering what that actually means. Can you give us some concrete examples?" Meghan straightened up in her chair like she had been personally attacked. Her smile disappeared completely. "I find it really interesting that you would even question my service, Greg. I've done more for charitable causes than most people could ever dream of doing. I've used my platform to speak truth to power. I've sacrificed everything for the greater good." Greg leaned forward just a bit. "Okay, but what specific actions are we talking about? What charities? What causes? I'm just trying to understand what you mean by sacrifice." She let out a laugh that sounded more like a scoff. "You really don't get it, do you? The fact that I'm even here, talking to someone like you, is service. The fact that I wake up every day and deal with the constant attacks and criticism, that's sacrifice. Not everyone has to build houses with their hands to be making a difference." The audience shifted uncomfortably in their seats. A few people whispered to each other. Greg maintained his composure, but his expression had changed. He was no longer smiling. "Someone like me," Greg repeated slowly. "What exactly does that mean?" Meghan waved her hand dismissively. "You know what it means. You sit here every night, making jokes and mocking people who are actually trying to change the world. You don't understand what real struggle is. You don't understand what it's like to have every move scrutinized and criticized." Greg sat back in his chair and folded his hands. "Actually, I think anyone in the public eye understands scrutiny. That comes with the territory. But I'm still waiting to hear about these concrete examples of service. You mentioned speaking truth to power. Can you tell us about a specific instance where you did that?" She looked at him like he had just asked the most ridiculous question in the world. "Every time I speak, I'm speaking truth to power, Greg. Every interview I do, every appearance I make, I'm challenging systems of oppression. I'm fighting against institutions that have held people down for centuries." "Which institutions specifically?" Greg asked calmly. "All of them," she snapped. Her voice had risen now, and her face was starting to flush. "The media, the establishment, the people who want to silence voices like mine, people who ask insulting questions like you're doing right now." The audience was completely silent now. Everyone could feel that something was about to break. Greg remained perfectly calm, which seemed to make her even more agitated. "I'm just asking for clarity," Greg said evenly. "You're on a talk show. People want to know what you mean when you make broad statements. That's kind of how interviews work." Meghan leaned forward and pointed her finger at him. "No, this is how your interviews work. You bring people on to embarrass them, to make them look bad, to prop yourself up by tearing others down. I came here thinking we could have an actual conversation, but clearly you're just like all the rest of them. Greg's eyebrows went up. All the rest of who? The haters, the trolls, the people who can't stand to see a strong woman speaking her mind. Her voice was getting louder with every word. You invited me here under false pretenses. You told my team this would be a respectful conversation. It is a respectful conversation, Greg replied calmly. I've asked you basic questions that any journalist would ask. If you find that disrespectful, then maybe the problem isn't with the questions. She stood up halfway out of her chair. How dare you? Do you know who I am? Do you know what I've been through? I don't have to sit here and take this kind of treatment from someone who's never experienced a fraction of what I've dealt with. The audience gasped. Some people looked shocked. Others looked uncomfortable. Greg just sat there, completely still, watching her unravel in real time. I think everyone experiences challenges in life, Greg said quietly. But most people don't go on television and claim they're special because of it. Most people just do their jobs and help others without needing constant praise and validation. Her face turned red. You have no idea what you're talking about. Absolutely no idea. I've given up everything. My family, my privacy, my old life, everything. And for what? To be interrogated by people like you who don't appreciate anything I've sacrificed? Greg shook his head slowly. You didn't give up those things. You chose to step away from them. There's a difference between sacrifice and choice. And you chose to become a public figure who makes public statements. So when you do that, people are going to ask you to back up what you say. She was fully standing now. Her hands were shaking. This is exactly what I'm talking about. This is the kind of harassment I deal with every single day. You're twisting my words. You're trying to make me look bad. I haven't twisted anything, Greg said calmly. I've literally just asked you to explain your own statements. If that feels like harassment to you, then maybe you should think about why that is. Meghan grabbed her microphone and yanked it off her lapel. The sound made a horrible screeching noise through the speakers. I don't need this. I don't need to sit here and be disrespected by someone who makes a living off negativity and cynicism. I came here in good faith, and this is how you treat me? I've treated you exactly how I treat every guest, Greg responded, with direct questions and honest conversation. If you can't handle that, then you're right. Maybe you shouldn't be here. Her eyes went wide. Are you seriously telling me to leave? I'm saying if you feel that attacked by basic interview questions, then maybe this isn't the right format for you, Greg said simply. She threw the microphone down on the chair. It bounced and fell to the floor with a loud thud. Unbelievable. Absolutely unbelievable. This is going to be everywhere, you know. Everyone is going to hear about how you treated me, how you ambushed me with hostile questions and created a toxic environment. Greg picked up his own note cards and set them aside. I think the footage will speak for itself. Anyone who watches this will see exactly what happened. They'll see the questions I asked and how you responded. And they can make up their own minds about who was being unreasonable. She pointed at him again with a trembling hand. You're a bully. That's what you are. You hide behind your desk and your jokes and your sarcasm, but really you're just a bully who can't stand strong women. I've interviewed dozens of strong women on this show, Greg said calmly, and none of them have had a meltdown because I asked them to explain their own words. So maybe it's not about being a strong woman. Maybe it's about being able to defend your positions when challenged. Meghan looked around at the audience like she was waiting for someone to defend her. No one said anything. No one moved. They just sat there watching this entire thing unfold like a car crash in slow motion. This show is a joke, she said through gritted teeth. You're a joke, and anyone who watches this garbage is a joke too. The audience let out a collective gasp. Someone in the back row shouted something, but it was hard to make out what they said. Greg just sat there with his arms crossed, completely unbothered. Well, you're entitled to your opinion, Greg said. just like I'm entitled to ask guests to back up their claims with facts instead of feelings. She started walking toward the exit, her heels clicking loudly on the studio floor. But then she stopped and turned back around. You know what your problem is, Greg. You can't handle the fact that some people are actually making a difference in the world while you're just sitting here making jokes. You're threatened by people who have real influence. Greg shrugged. If asking you to name one specific charity you've worked with is being threatened, then sure, I'm terrified. Her jaw dropped. I've worked with countless organizations. Countless. But I'm not going to stand here and list them for you, like I'm some kind of performing monkey. I don't owe you anything. You don't owe me anything, Greg agreed, but you do owe your supporters something. You owe them honesty. You owe them transparency. And when you go around claiming you've sacrificed everything for public service, people have a right to ask what that actually means. She let out a sound that was half laugh, half cry. I can't believe this. I genuinely cannot believe this is happening. I came here to have a conversation, and you turned it into an attack. I asked you questions, Greg said simply. That's all I did. You're the one who started attacking me, my show, and my audience. You're the one who's getting emotional and throwing your microphone around. I'm just sitting here doing my job. Meghan's voice went up even higher. Your job is to make people look stupid. That's all you do. You bring people on and you twist everything they say, and you make them look ridiculous. I think you're doing that all by yourself, Greg said quietly. The audience gasped again. Some people couldn't help but let out nervous laughs. Meghan looked like she might actually explode. Her face was completely red now, and her hands were balled into fists. That's it. I'm done. I'm leaving. And you can explain to your viewers why your guest walked off the set because you couldn't treat her with basic human decency. Greg nodded slowly. I think the viewers will understand perfectly. But before you go, I just want to say one thing. You came on this show and claimed you're all about service and sacrifice. But the moment someone asks you to prove it, you fall apart. The moment someone questions you, you play the victim. That's not strength. That's not service. That's just ego. She stood there frozen for a moment. Her mouth opened and closed, like she wanted to say something, but couldn't find the words. Finally, she just shook her head and stormed toward the exit. You're going to regret this, she shouted over her shoulder. I doubt it, Greg called back. She pushed through the studio door so hard it slammed against the wall. The sound echoed through the entire room. And then she was gone. The audience sat in complete silence for what felt like forever. No one knew what to do or say. Greg just sat there behind his desk, looking completely calm, like nothing unusual had just happened. Finally, he turned to the camera with a slight smile. Well, that went well. The audience erupted into laughter and applause. The tension broke like a dam bursting. People were standing up, clapping, some of them cheering. Greg waved his hand to quiet them down. Folks, I want to be clear about something, he said once the noise died down. I didn't bring anyone on this show to ambush them or make them look bad. I asked fair questions, basic questions, the kind of questions any journalist should ask when someone makes big claims about themselves. And what you just saw was someone who couldn't handle being asked to back up their own words. The audience clapped again. Greg continued, I've interviewed presidents, celebrities, activists, people from all walks of life. And you know what the strong ones have in common? They can defend their positions. They can explain their thinking. They don't fall apart the second someone disagrees with them or asks them to be specific. They don't play the victim. They engage with the conversation. He picked up his note cards and tapped them on the desk. What you just witnessed was someone who's so used to softball interviews and praise that they literally cannot function when faced with basic accountability. And honestly, that tells you everything you need to know. Someone in the audience shouted, "You were too nice to her." Greg laughed. Maybe I was, But I don't think being mean would have helped anything. Sometimes the best thing you can do is just let people show you who they really are. And boy, did we get a show tonight. The audience laughed and clapped again. Greg glanced at his notes and then back at the camera. You know, she said I was threatened by her influence. But here's the thing. Real influence comes from actually doing things, from making real changes, from helping real people. It doesn't come from going on television and talking about how influential you are. It doesn't come from demanding praise and recognition. It comes from putting in the work, even when no one's watching. He leaned back in his chair. And when you actually do the work, when you actually help people, you don't need to go on talk shows and brag about it. Other people will talk about it for you. Your actions speak for themselves. You don't need to get defensive when someone asks you questions because you have answers. Real, concrete answers. The audience was completely focused on him now. The energy in the room had shifted from shocked and tense to engaged and supportive. She accused me of being a bully, Greg went on, but asking someone to back up their claims isn't bullying. Holding people accountable for what they say isn't harassment. And if you can't handle that, if you crumble the moment someone asks you a direct question, then maybe you shouldn't be out there making grand statements about yourself in the first place. More applause. Greg smiled and shook his head. I've been doing this job for a long time. And I can tell you, the people who actually make a difference in the world, they're usually the ones who talk about it the least. They're too busy actually doing the work to sit around demanding recognition for it. The people who never stop talking about how much they've sacrificed, how much they've given up, how special they are, those are usually the people who haven't actually done much of anything. He paused and looked directly into the camera. And before anyone tries to twist this, I'm not saying she hasn't done anything good in her life. I'm sure she has. But when you build your entire public image on being a victim and a martyr, when you can't answer simple questions without having a breakdown, when you attack everyone who doesn't worship you, then you're not a public servant, you're just a narcissist with a platform. The audience went wild. People were standing, clapping, some of them whistling. Greg had to wave them down again to continue. Look, everyone has challenges in life, he said once things quieted down. Everyone deals with criticism. Everyone faces obstacles. But most people don't go on television every other week to talk about how hard they have it. Most people just deal with their problems and move forward. They don't expect a medal for being an adult. He shuffled his papers. And you know what's really frustrating? There are people out there doing incredible work, real work. People volunteering at homeless shelters, people mentoring kids, people working in communities that need help, people making actual sacrifices to make the world better. And they don't get interviews. They don't get magazine covers. They don't get praised and celebrated. They just do the work because it needs to be done. The audience clapped in agreement. Greg nodded. Meanwhile, we have people like the guest who just stormed off this set, who do one charity photo op, and then talk about it for the next 5 years, like they cured cancer. Who use the word sacrifice to describe choices they made that benefited themselves. Who can't handle the slightest bit of pushback without throwing a tantrum. He took a breath and smiled slightly. So, yeah, I asked her some tough questions. And, yeah, she couldn't handle it. But that's not my fault. That's not bullying. That's just basic journalism. And if that's too much for someone to handle, then they need to stay out of the public eye. The applause continued. Greg looked at his watch and then back at the camera. I think we've spent enough time on that disaster, he said with a laugh. The point is, actions matter more than words. Character matters more than image. And when someone shows you who they really are, believe them. What you saw tonight was real. That wasn't edited. That wasn't taken out of context. That was someone revealing their true self when they didn't get the worship they expected. He picked up a different set of cards. Now, we were supposed to have another segment after that interview, but obviously our timing is completely shot. So instead, I want to talk about something else. I want to talk about actual public service. Real service. The kind that doesn't come with press releases and photo ops. The audience settled in to listen. Greg's tone shifted to something more serious. There's a veteran in my neighborhood who spends every Saturday at the local park picking up trash. Nobody asked him to do it. Nobody pays him. He just does it because he wants the park to be nice for the kids who play there. That's service. There's a teacher I know who stays after school 3 days a week to tutor students who are struggling. She doesn't get extra pay for it. She doesn't post about it on social media. She just does it because those kids need help. That's service. He looked directly at the camera again. Service isn't about making yourself look good. It's not about getting credit or recognition. It's about seeing a need and filling it, regardless of whether anyone notices or cares. And the people who do that kind of work, they don't need to go on talk shows and brag about it. They don't need to throw tantrums when someone questions them. They just keep doing the work. The audience was quiet now, listening intently. Greg's voice was calm but firm. So when someone comes on this show, or any show, and starts talking about how much they've sacrificed, how much they've done, how special they are, my first question is always going to be the same. Prove it. Show me. Give me specifics, because talk is cheap. Anyone can say they're making a difference. Actually making a difference? That takes work. Real work. He set the cards down and folded his hands on the desk. And if you can't answer that question, if you can't back up your claims, if you fall apart when someone asks you to be specific, then you're not a public servant. You're just someone who likes the attention that comes with pretending to be one. More applause filled the studio. Greg smiled and shrugged. That's all I'm saying. Hold people accountable. Ask questions. Don't just accept whatever narrative someone is trying to sell you. And if they can't handle basic scrutiny, that tells you everything you need to know about whether they're the real deal or just putting on a show. He glanced at his producer off camera. We're obviously not going to have time for our other planned segments tonight, so I think we're just going to wrap it up here. But before we go, I want to thank all of you for being here tonight and witnessing that absolutely insane moment. You'll probably be seeing clips of it everywhere by tomorrow morning. The audience laughed. Greg grinned. And to anyone watching at home who thinks I was too hard on our former guest, I want you to watch the footage again. Watch what I actually asked versus how she responded, and then ask yourself, who was really being unreasonable here? Who was really being disrespectful? Because I think the answer is pretty obvious. He stood up from behind the desk. That's our show for tonight. Thanks for watching. Thanks for being an amazing audience. And remember, always question people who talk a big game but can't back it up. Actions speak louder than words. Every single time. The audience gave him a standing ovation as the show's music started playing. Greg waved and walked off the set, leaving the empty guest chair as a reminder of what had just happened. The camera held on that empty chair for a few seconds before cutting away. In the span of one interview, viewers had watched someone completely unravel on live television. They had seen what happens when someone who's used to being praised and protected suddenly faces actual questions. They had witnessed the difference between someone who talks about service and someone who actually understands what it means. Greg had done exactly what he always did. He asked direct questions and expected honest answers. He didn't attack anyone personally. He didn't raise his voice. He didn't insult his guest. He simply refused to accept vague statements and demanded specifics. And that was all it took to expose someone who had built their entire image on a foundation of nothing. The audience filed out of the studio that night, knowing they had witnessed something extraordinary. Not because of any spectacular production or planned drama, but because they had seen someone show their true colors when they didn't get the treatment they felt entitled to. They had seen the mask slip completely off. And Greg had let it all happen by doing nothing more than his job, by asking the questions that needed to be asked, by refusing to play along with someone's carefully crafted narrative, by treating his guest the same way he would treat anyone else, with direct questions and honest conversation. That's what made the whole thing so powerful. Greg didn't need to do anything dramatic. He didn't need to attack or insult or create conflict. He just needed to ask basic questions and let his guest reveal themselves. And reveal herself she did in the most spectacular way possible. The studio lights dimmed. The crew started breaking down the set. But the impact of what had just happened would last much longer than that one evening. Because everyone who watched had learned an important lesson about the difference between image and reality, between talk and action, between someone who serves others and someone who only serves themselves. And sometimes all it takes is 37 seconds of basic questions to show the world exactly who someone really is.